Hello.
Hi.
This is about the Quentin Tarantino interview. There is a large variation of questions throughout the interview. What type of questions stood out most and why?
I think there were quite a few open questions. It was sort of quite often, especially when the interview got a bit more heated, the interviewer wanted to find out Tarantino's response and reasoning for what he was saying. For example, he didn't just want to know whether Tarantino believed movie violence incites real violence. He wanted to know why, even though Tarantino was answering with quite closed responses. And then I think there's quite a few suggestive questions. Like there's one where he sort of says, "Are you disappointed?" And he implies that there's disappointment and doesn't just ask for his honest reaction. I think they're probably the most two common interview questions.
Throughout the interview, there were both suggested and sort of direct questions. What effect do you feel this had on the whole interview and why?
I think the suggestive questions were quite, like I say, quite frequent, and I think they definitely helped change the tone of the movie, because instead of, like when the interviewer asked Tarantino whether he's disappointed in the reaction, by implying he's disappointed, it sort of definitely inciting a response from Tarantino, regardless of whether he agrees with it or not. He's going to try and sort of dispel the belief that there's negative opinions to it, or in the case that he doesn't, he could try, defend that and say, yeah, and I'm pretty disappointed about it, but he doesn't, and he really goes at it and sort of says, I'm not disappointed, and tries to really bring home to us and the interviewer that he doesn't believe that there were negative reactions. As to the indirect questions, the direct questions, I think they're pretty good at just getting a single response from him. We see throughout that he goes on and elaborates quite frequently on to sort of in quite significant detail. So the direct questions are just good at getting a short, snappy response, which isn't that common from him.
There are different topics brought up throughout the whole interview, but ultimately, what was the purpose of the interview? Like, for instance, his love of violence, his movie. So,
I think that originally the whole point of the interview was to find out about his new film Django Unchained, which is an awesome film, and I think it was initially designed to be a promotional tool for that. However, when the interviewer begins noting about the violence within said film and Tarantino's love of violence as a whole in films, that's when I think it turns into more of a sort of a debate and a sort of an argument as to whether movie violence does cause real life violence and whether we should be watching it as much as we do.
The whole form and style of the interview was conducted in different ways in my view. Do you feel that the form in which the interview was conducted changed, and what things would have changed it?
I think to start off with, it does seem to be quite a stereotypical interview. They introduce themselves and it goes question, answer, until they do bring up the question of movie violence, at which point Tarantino goes on the defensive and definitely really, really strongly defends his viewpoint that it doesn't cause actual violence in real life. So I think as soon as he does that, it changes, so it's more sort of Tarantino cuts in and expresses his point in quite a sort of a vicious manner and doesn't sort of politely sit back and say, oh yeah, I don't think it does. He really goes for it.
Are you disappointed by the reaction of the movie was one of the questions the interviewer asked Quentin Tarantino. What type of question do you feel this is, and what effect do you feel it had on the interview?
I think you could say it's suggestive because it's sort of implying that he's disappointed by the reaction to the film. It's not saying, what was your reaction to the film? Why? It's suggesting that he is already disappointed, and we, as an audience, have no knowledge as to whether he is actually disappointed. However, I think it could be quite open. It's sort of closed in the sense that it does just require a yes or no answer. But depending on the way it was asked, it could invite a longer response as to why he feels disappointed or why he doesn't feel disappointed and disagrees with that statement.
When looking at a variation of interviews, would you would see that like formal and informal act very differently and they have different structures. Do you feel that this interview had a structure, and what sort of kind of, would it be formal, informal?
I think it started off quite informal because, like I say, the interviewer introduces himself and Tarantino and sort of starts by asking a question, getting a response, asking a question, getting another response. But then, as soon as the topic of violence is introduced, it becomes more of a case of, it becomes quite informal in the sense that it becomes more of a debate, an argument with each side, sort of, with the interviewer continually pressuring Tarantino to sort of explain why he made the statements he has, and with Tarantino defending it as saying it's none of your business. So it sort of loses that formal sort of stereotypical style of an interview where you would expect the interviewer to just answer the questions and not sort of really hit out against them. It loses that sort of decorum and sort of, you know, the nature we would associate with interviews. It becomes more of a debate and argument.
Thank you.
Yeah.